Hello.
All right, up next, we're shifting gears into a panel discussion on the future of comms jobs, and it's going to be a really lively conversation about where our profession is headed.
Yep, and we got joining us Pinaki, who's actually going to be leading the discussion. We got Mike, Diane, Danielle, and great insights, of course.
Well, yeah, I can't wait for this one. Panel,
right,
go ahead, take it away.
I can't hear Pinaki.
Here we go. How about now?
Yes.
Pinaki is on mute. I am not on mute anymore. Fun time still, years from now. You're on mute, Pinaki. Well, hello, everybody. Hello, friends. It's great to see you all out here. It's awesome to see some of the names in the chat. So what we're talking about here today is, as we all know, the communications job market is like a roller coaster, and that continues, right? So the skills that internal communicators need in the organization is constantly changing, always evolving. And depending on where you are, you're looking at it from a different perspective, right? So we're going to dig into that. So welcome to our session on the future of comms jobs. My name is Pinaki Kathiari. I'm the CEO of Local Wisdom and co-founder of Resource Hero. I've been in the world of comms and digital services for over 25 years, and I'm really excited to facilitate this panel discussion. I'll introduce our panelists. So today with me, we have Diane Schwartz, who's the CEO at Reagan Communications. If you don't know them, they hold trainings, conferences, networking experiences all around the world to advance communicators' careers. They're thought leaders when it comes to how communicators should be leveling up. We also have Mike Klein, IABC fellow, editor-in-chief of Strategic Magazine, and also the founder of #WeLeadComms. Mike's been in the world of internal comms and comms for longer than he'd probably like me to say. And the amazing thing here about Mike is he brings this global perspective and years of experience to the table here. And finally, we have Daniel Mendez, founder of #CommsJobs. Now, Daniel has a fantastic story coming to the United States from Chile and creating an online community to create connections with communicators and job opportunities. It's worked for him, and I've personally met people who have found high-profile roles through connections. These folks are amazing. I'm going to facilitate this session so we all learn, we all get to take home their wisdom and use it in our day-to-day. I have some questions prepared, and we'll have time for some Q&A at the end as well. So you'll see, just like y'all been using, you hit the Q&A box in your chat window. You could sort them by recency and add some questions. I'll be monitoring that. So my fellow panelists, let's do a quick intro. So in less than a minute, if you could tell us really quickly what you do in your current role or roles, and also tell us when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Because I want to know. We want to know. Diane, can we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So at Reagan, I oversee an amazing team that, as hopefully many of you know, we produce a lot of content via conferences, membership councils, awards programs, and a sundry of great resources that we have for communicators at all stages of their career. So depending on the week, I'm doing something different every week, but that is also to say that I love the communications function and helping communicators elevate their position in their organization. That's our mission. What I wanted to be, what job I wanted to have when I sort of a job, I guess it's a job, which is to be a best-selling author. So it was best-selling. It always had to be best-selling, not just an author.
I mean, why not? Yeah. What otherwise? Thank you, Diane. Mike, how about yourself?
Well, my name is Mike Klein. I'm based in Reykjavik, Iceland. I currently do a fair amount of consulting and research in the internal communication space. I am also the editor-in-chief of Strategic Magazine, a thought leadership platform for communication leadership worldwide. And I lead We Lead Comms, which is an industry initiative to drive recognition at all levels of the profession, whether you're a VP of comms for a Fortune 100 company, or whether you're looking for your next position. If you call yourself a communication professional, there's a space for you at We Lead Comms. And what I wanted to do when I grew up was to be a politician. And I kind of am, even though I don't have an office.
It does. That's very true. Excellent. Thank you, Mike. And Daniel, what about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And Mike, I think you're an ambassador now, so sort of the same. I am Daniel Mendez. I'm the founder of Comms Jobs. My day job is in corporate communications in a Fortune 50 company. And I've been in the industry for about 18 years. In Comms Jobs, the mission is to really help connect communication professionals with opportunity. It's a very friendly, free community open to anyone who's currently in the job search or just to connect with people and build their network so that they're ready when they need it. Thank you for having me.
I think I know the answer to it. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, sorry. And yeah, I wanted to be a musician. I actually was for a little bit, but then things went south, fell in love with communications, and here we are.
Communications will do that to you. Well, awesome. Thank you all for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us. I'm going to break out this conversation into a little bit of a past, present, future type of thing. So let's talk a little bit about the near past, like in the last 6 months, right? So Dan, I'll start with you, and anyone else wants to jump in after that, feel free to jump in. But I'm really interested in what you've noticed most in the comms job market in the last 6 months. I'm just really curious of like what you've seen from your perspective.
So I think the main thing, which I think it's important to remind everybody, is that I'm still seeing a lot of jobs. And definitely there's a big spike in the last couple of months that I've seen, again, very anecdotal, across different industries, different companies, which is very complicated to explain because we are seeing the jobs, but then at the same time, you have a lot of people commenting that it's a very hard market out there. It's been very difficult to break through. So I think what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of roles, but also there's a lot of demand, right? There's been definitely a lot of changes in a lot of industries, given the current situation, not just here in the US, but worldwide. So I think that's one of the main things. And of course, another really important element that I'm seeing across the board, like it or not, and I'm sure that we've heard this many times. We should be counting the amount of times that we say AI, right? AI is definitely disrupting the market. There's a lot of roles that are becoming available to support the adoption of AI in enterprises. And communicators are really playing a huge and central role in this adoption because it has a lot to do with engagement, with change management, and really help leaders position this strategy. So that's another element that I'm seeing. And I want to give some opportunity to Diane and Mike to comment as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Diane or Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very loaded question. You know, that is the big question, like what's happening in the marketplace. And we all know all the change that's taking place. So the role of the communicator has been changing pretty rapidly in the past couple of years, really post-COVID, and very much accelerated by what's happening in the geopolitical sphere and obviously with AI. So I think, you know, with a lot of jobs that are either open positions or that are being, that, you know, people that are on the market or even like listed on LinkedIn, some, you know, there's some coding there in terms of like what we see organizations are looking for future leaders because of AI and other forces. For example, what used to be the soft skills, like around leadership and so forth, and maybe listed in an ad, in a job ad, you know, looking for someone with leadership skills. I think it's really important right now for communicators to double down. I'm sure we'll talk about it in a minute on what those really are, what that really means, because that's going to be the difference between a successful communicator and one whose job might be replaced. So, and then the other area, we're seeing a lot more interest from companies in hiring those who have some sort of public affairs, issues management, knowledge of governance, risk management, that area of comms.
Excellent. Yeah, bringing that into internal comms as well. Excellent. And there was definitely some talk about soft skills earlier on in this, whatnot. Interesting.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
It's interesting. It's interesting to hear you say that, Diane, in terms of, particularly what leaders are saying they're looking for. Because one of the things that I'm seeing, particularly in terms of the job postings and in terms of the feedback that I'm getting from job seekers, one of the things about We Lead Comms is that actually about 20% of the people who are recognized are actually people who are in between positions. And one of the things we do is, try to raise their profile as much as we can in this situation. But the two things that I'm seeing are, one, relentless overspecification for jobs. Like, yes, you want leadership. Yes, you want C-suite gravitas, but you want self-sufficiency in Canva and 20 other programs, some of which might even be rendered obsolete by the time the job finally closes. So you've got that duality. On the one hand, you have this drive for, a higher strategic perspective, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that you completely de-risk the functional elements of the job. And that's creating a certain degree of intimidation in the market. And then there's also rampant ageism, which, given what we're about to go through, is actually something that, we could see an argument for reversing, because what we're going through right now is, maybe the fourth or fifth major technological change, going from email to the web, to social media, to the smartphone, to AI. We've lived through all, those of us who are like 50, 60 plus have lived through all 5 or 6 of these. People who are digital natives maybe have lived through 3. So I think there's perhaps, I hope, some movement towards respect for people with more seniority in the market going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to respond. Like, I think that's a great point. I wouldn't say it's one instead of the other. I would say it's a given. You need to have those skills, like doing the job, the tasks that, and I think a lot of people put job descriptions through AI, and then it's just the kitchen sink, it's not edited and so forth. But end of the day, it's, you have to show impact as a communicator. You need to have that business fluency, so that you're showing you're not always walking in just with the comms hat. You're wearing that business hat too.
Excellent. Thank you all for that. And that's kind of like the past 6 months. And I feel like you sum it up. It just so happens that I was having a conversation with an HR leader over this weekend, and we're talking about the job market. And she was like, it's not an employer's market, nor is it an employee's market. Like, there are a lot of jobs out there that are very demanding when they're not really finding the right people. Meanwhile, there's a lot of people out there that are looking for the right job. So it's an interesting phenomenon, was her take. And that took me a little bit by surprise, and I thought that was really interesting. So to kind of shift into now, like, the present day, what's kind of going on today, and I'll start with you, like, Daniel, because you've been really talking about comms jobs. In your opinion, what should job seekers really be doing to, like, really kind of thrive in the future if we're out there looking?
Yeah, I heard something this week that I thought it was interesting, that a lot of people are really trying to focus on future-proofing their careers, but there's a better approach that it's to be future prepared, right? Because honestly, it's very hard to tell what the future is going to bring as it's changing so quickly. And there's so many variables that are outside of our control, right? So I think it really boils down to 3 things. Number one, and again, I'm going to be a little repetitive on this, but I think we really need to make the point here, but it's to get comfortable with technology, and in particular with AI, right? And here, what it's important is not to self-sabotage while you're doing that. That means don't outsource your voice, right? Don't outsource the things that need to remain inherently human, right? Because everyone is really tinkering with their AI right now. And then LinkedIn this week published, you've probably seen a lot of AI stuff popping up in LinkedIn because they're showing a lot of data around AI literacy and how everything is all across the board, roles are being impacted. But adopting technology and AI doesn't really mean that you have to become a prompt engineer, but you should be able to use AI tools. You should be able to understand what's in the back end. You need to understand what happens when the data that you're feeding the different LLMs, right, is not the right data. So really understand and try to get into the weeds of what AI is and what is not. It's really important, right? The second thing is that we need to learn to be learners, right? And really ensure that we're always having that growth mindset and be always open to learn new things. As communicators, we're good at that, right? We are always connecting with new people, connecting with new topics, and really studying, right? So that we can better represent those voices. So continue to be a learner and be intentional about that. There's a lot of really great resources out there for everybody. And a lot of them are free. So take advantage of those. And if you don't know where those resources are, connect with your people. And that brings me to the third element, which I think is that you really need to invest in your network and make sure that you create those relationships so that you build and make friends and relationships before you need them. Someone the other day said the analogy of the garden, right? So you need to keep your garden growing and giving you fruit and vegetables all the time, not only when you're hungry, right? And you need to focus on keeping that relationship building, being very intentional. And I wanted to point out that in the LinkedIn data that was published this week, it was very clear that this point is super important. It said that 79% of professionals still believe that human intuition and trusted colleagues matter more than AI. So the opportunities are still coming from people, not from job boards and not from the search that you're doing in the different engines. So, if I had to summarize it in a formula, human abilities plus tech acumen plus relationships is going to make you be future prepared.
That's super fantastic. I like the adaptability part because that's the one thing that's always constant. It was said earlier today. And, we're saying like really invest in your network and do all the things that AI can't do. AI can't invest in your network, right? AI can't keep a pulse onto what things are happening all around you right now. So really focusing on what can't AI do that only you can do. I'm gonna move over to Diane. Oh, sorry, Mike, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good segue because you were talking about stuff that only we can do. And I want to pick up the line that Daniel shared, which was around being future prepared. And I want to add that one can only be future prepared if you're present aware. I had a very interesting conversation with my podcast co-host, Janet Hitchin, who had a very simple piece of advice. I bristled at it initially, but then I got it, which is that if you are really looking at AI and looking at your future career development, you really need to know what your present process is. What is it that you're doing and how do you sequence what you do and do what you do so that you can then figure out how do you replace what you do, how do you augment what you do, and how do you double down on what you do. So once you're present aware, then you can start this exploration around AI and skills development, stuff like that, from a much stronger position. But the other thing I'd say is in addition to owning your network development, you all need to also own your professional development. Because, and I see this in a lot of conversations that I have with people, particularly when I'm promoting, my training stuff or my events or what have you, is people say, well, company's not paying for it, so I'm not going to do it. Well, you've just basically earned your ticket to obsolescence if that's your attitude. I would say that probably 99% of the people on this call, by virtue of being on this call, do not have that attitude. But my invitation is to be conscious about owning your professional development at this point.
Right on. It's kind of like you need to know where you are, where you're going in order to create a pathway to get there. Excellent. Then with Diane, we were talking just a little while earlier about some of those like misconceptions that communicators have about what employers want right now. I think I'll give you a little bit of time to like talk about that. Do you have any thoughts on that from what you're hearing from both sides?
Well, we know that communicators struggle with the idea of being, or the reality of often being order takers, right? And to get away from that, to move away from that, is to become more strategic, right? But people don't have the time; they're busy doing tasks and so forth. So we see that struggle all the time. And back to the learning and professional development. At Reagan, we've created a communications framework, which is free for anyone. If you go to the top of our site, you can check it out. It's called the Communications Framework. And we've identified the skills, competencies, and knowledge areas that one needs to succeed in all areas of comms. And it doesn't, you have to continue learning and upskilling and so forth. So taking the time, even outside of work hours, to get up to speed, not only on AI. I mean, there are a lot of companies right now, believe it or not. I mean, AI is super important, but it's not all about AI. There are other things going on in the internal comms role and in the communications role. So don't spend all your time on AI, I guess would be, one piece of advice. The other thing in terms of job searching is identifying maybe the top 20 companies that you would love, if you are looking for a job, that you would love to work for, rather than the position itself, but thinking about the company and the culture. And we spend a lot of time at work. So really thinking about where you want to be for 8 to 13 hours a day, I think is really important, as like what job listing you want to apply to. So I would say, those two things. But the leadership, the adaptability, the change management skills, navigating uncertainty, I mean, these are all critical right now for any communicator, even at the lower level.
That's right. It is just all about like learning. So I think even if you're like in the midst of like looking or whatnot, you should still be learning and talking about what you're learning. And this is very quick, interesting segue. It's like similar to what's happening in the user experience market, where it's also going through some struggles. And in the user experience market, a lot of what people are doing is testing and experimenting, conceptually trying different things out while they're in the middle of things, in order to show that work when they do get an interview and stuff. So what kind of trials, exercises, experiments can you do as communicators here? We're going to move into future, talking about the future. And we'll start with a little bit about the short-term future. And we were just talking a lot about what things to upskill on, right? We were talking about, Mike was talking about AI, Diane was talking about other aspects and soft skills and things like that. And it's funny, everyone in the chat is talking about the M-dash. But Mike, if you had to spend if you had like 10 hours to upskill in the next like 3 months, what should people put that time towards? Like, and it would be great to hear all your thoughts on like, what should we place our bets on?
Well, I wouldn't spend 10 hours upskilling. I'd probably spend 5 hours upskilling and 5 hours horizon scanning, if you will, because a lot of today's AI skills are going to be obsolete with the next set of tools. I mean, for example, I use Ideogram to generate pictures for Strategic Magazine. What I'm seeing is, it was great for about 3 months. Now I'm seeing the same thing over and over again. At some point, I will jump to another tool. But learning about how you replace these tools and how you work them into the work that you do is pretty critical. But it's only, AI isn't just about how we can use AI and what AI can do for us. We also have to look at what AI can do to us and what it can do to the organizations and the nature of work itself. One of the things that I'm looking at, I've got a piece coming out next week, is something that I call the big shift, which is really about, what change in the nature of work is about to happen. when you replace people who are primarily focused on generating output and generating interactions with people to people who are mainly going to be focused on making decisions about how AI or how other automation tools deliver the services and the products that they deliver. So internal communications is going to need to shift from, simply trying to push engagement and trying to make people feel, safe and informed about what they need to do, to being able to support making more and more decisions more rapidly and more consistently. I mean, is this going to involve every organization? Not necessarily, but I think the thinking shift is definitely going to be something that starts to happen at scale. So if I was spending, 10 hours, I would probably spend 5 hours looking at what skills do I need to acquire, and then 5 hours thinking, okay, what's going on in the world of work that we're operating in so that we can be future prepared, as Daniel would say.
I love that. And I know you, and I think that's an iterative process for you, constantly upskilling and then horizon scanning. I love that word, horizon scanning.
It's
Daniel,
it's Anne-Marie Blake's term, but I love it.
Anne-Marie Blake is also cool as heck too. So I'm a fan of hers. Daniel or Diane, any adds to that? If you had like 10 hours to upskill, like what would you do at that time?
Diane, do you want to go?
Yeah. Well, I think reading the business press, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, or some as objective of a media source as you can read, but just to be on top of what's happening in the marketplace, and in particularly your ecosystem or sector that you're in, and really understanding. This goes back to business fluency and just immersing yourself in reading financial stories and business stories and things impacting, the world and the economy, I think will make you a stronger communicator internally. You need to be able, if you're an internal comms person, you need to know what the ecosystem is in which your C-suite is, thinking about every day. And so getting out of that, taking off that comms hat for a minute, I would spend time on that. I would spend time talking to other people, learning cross-departmentally, cross-functionally. You never know, you may be taking on marketing roles. You may be taking on, you definitely should get to know your IT people, HR. I mean, that cross-functional and cross-departmental, alliances are very important. If you're looking for a job, talk to people in those departments as well. So, people are so open to just having an introductory conversation, with you if you just ask.
Love that. Yeah, it kind of goes into like the networking piece. And then earlier on, you were talking about just really hone in a little bit on that kind of researching and just reading and keeping up on things, because we talk a lot about being a trusted advisor, and that means knowing things before your partners know those things, right? Like, we're getting into conversations about AI when we're talking from our agency standpoint. I need to know about AI and, for example, like what AI thinks is a credible source for citations before our clients do, so I could speak to that intelligently. And these types of things are changing so quickly. That includes what's happening in the press and the news. That includes what's happening in your organizations and in other departments. So hats off to you, Diane, for that. Daniel, would you like to add anything for that one?
I mean, I think it's pretty covered. But one thing that I think it's important to mention is that people need to get used to reinvention. We need to really spend time getting comfortable with change and understanding that if we get exposed to change, we need to embrace it, right? And we need to be able to reinvent ourselves. Things are changing so quickly that we can't think anymore that our role is something, it's a given, right? It is not. It's going to change, and it will continue to change at a very fast pace. So I would just look for resources to learn that if you don't have it, and if you have it, reinforce it every day.
There's one thing that I overlooked when I was answering the question about what to work that jumped out at me, particularly when Diane was talking about business relevance and impact. And that is, how do you use AI to help you demonstrate the impact and value of your work? How can you use AI as a research tool, as an analysis tool, and as a tool for getting the information about what the business thinks is important, and then looking at how you can influence and change the performance in each of those areas? That's something that AI can give us that we haven't really had consistent access to before, that could actually be a game changer as we position ourselves going forward.
Fantastic advice for both of you. Yeah, like for example, I know I have used AI to consolidate large amounts of data sets in order for me to get back results from like a survey on the use of internal comms tool. And for what you said earlier, Daniel, reinvention, that's definitely true. It made me think, where are we all in that change curve, right? I think even earlier on, Advita talked about the change curve. And now that we're thinking about all of this market, AI, and our professions, I wonder where we are. And that's kind of a whole different ballgame in itself. I'm going to switch off into a little bit about the long-term future, and then we're going to get into audience Q&As. I'm going to take a look, see what's there. So if you have some questions, pop them in the Q&A, folks. And I think we'll kind of, maybe we'll start with you, Diane, on this one, right? How do you see leadership now when you're thinking about the longer term future? And everybody take this with a grain of salt. From what I understand, none of the folks on this panelist are actually futurists or can actually tell the future, but they have a lot of experience where they could postulate what could be. Exactly. Mike did wear a cape at the last IABC, at 2 IABCs ago, but those are his superpowers. Now, so Diane, what do you see leadership's expectations changing when it comes to the future? Like basically based on how the landscape is changing, are there expectations realistic?
Well, those are two different questions.
They are two different questions.
There was this stat from McKinsey that 13% of employees strongly agree that leadership does not communicate effectively. And leadership is more like C-suite or, the senior leadership. And so this is a great opportunity for internal comms strategists, to help their executives communicate. Obviously, I mean, it's an obvious statement, but the data shows that there continues to be this, disconnect between senior leadership and employees. And it's harder and harder, even though there's a lot of return to office, going on this year and into next year with dispersed workforces, deskless workers, global workforces. Leadership's going to expect that employees are productive and morale is high. And, so the communicators need to use AI to deal with sort of the task and administrative oriented items so that they have time to think and be more strategic and do all these other things that we've been talking about on this call. I think leaders expect that. They don't necessarily need to know exactly how you're going to get there, but you need to get there that way. You need to use AI as your thought partner and task, assistant, so that you can help, move your company forward.
This is very interesting and very true, because I think the more leaders out there and the more space between leaders and actual people who are doing the work, the more it needs to communicate, and the more the perspective might be lost from one to the other, right? And so I think the role that someone plays to connect the dots across multiple lenses is going to be super important. And I think,
can I add one more thing I forgot to mention, which is what we're hearing a lot of sort of stress about, is communicators really understanding. I think, Mike, you had mentioned sort of the bad that AI can create out there, with deep fakes and misinformation. And, it's going to be comms fault oftentimes if something goes wrong. They may not get the credit But if there's a deep fake out there from the CEO saying something that CEO didn't really say, where does that blame maybe lie sometimes, even though may not be fair. So really understanding that and using tools out there to help you, I think, is really critical. That's sort of a risk management, reputation management role for comms people. But it's becoming harder and harder, and leadership's going to expect comms to help them with that.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about misinformation and particularly the spread of misinformation through electronic channels. I think one of the trends that I would like to see happen is a recognition that in an age where anybody can distribute pretty much any electronic information that they want to whomever they want to, human networks and the understanding of how human networks operate through organizational analysis, network analysis, and other tools is going to be absolutely critical. An organization needs to know who the 3% of the people are who drive 90% of the conversations. And they need to know to keep them as they go through these cycles of layoff and rehiring as the AI pendulum shifts. But I see two other trends that are also worth mentioning. One is that I think we're going to see a shift, as I mentioned before, from a focus on engagement to a focus on alignment. And that's going to change the tone of the way organizations communicate. It's going to change the speed with which they communicate. And it's going to, I hope, narrow the gap between what organizations say and what organizations do. I think that's probably the biggest thing that's going to happen. The second thing is that we are going to see a thinning of middle management ranks. And as much as people in the internal comms world worship middle managers and line managers, the reality is that a lot of them and a lot of the friction and resistance that they create is going to disappear as we move forward into, the next stage of the workforce. And we need to be ready for that. I mean, the advantage for us is that communication can actually replace a lot of what had been going on in that space and do so much more cost effectively and create a much more consistency in the organization. I think the big opportunity for us is for us to be able to demonstrate that we are by far the most cost-effective part of any organization.
Very, very interesting. And I know we're kind of like drawing close to the end of time. I might kind of go into a few questions as we have, and then we'll kind of close out quickly. But thank you all for your help in answering these questions today. So one quick one that came up, because a lot of AI has come up in this, and it's asked a few times on here, what are your most impactful AI platforms or tools that you're using right now? If you could like rattle off just maybe your top 2 or 3 that the 3 of you are using.
I can start. So definitely Otter AI is like, if I don't have it, it's like I'm losing a limb. Really, really helpful. And then I think there's something to be said about, the fact that you should be trying different models. Like I think there's just different use cases between using ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, Pi, and others, depending on what you're trying to do. And sometimes, running stuff through different platforms and then bring it into another platform actually helps you untangle a couple of things. So I would say that probably those are the main ones. Now, I want to be also, there's a lot of people that don't like when we talk about Microsoft tools. There seems to be little sympathy for them, but I think understanding how Copilot is bringing together productivity tools in the workplace, it's super important. I mean, most companies or large enterprises use the Microsoft suite of tools, and understanding how to better make the best use of that, it's super important, because those are normally the approved tools. You don't have access to all the great tools that are out there if there's no enterprise contract in the middle. So we need to acknowledge that. So I would say that those are the main ones for me, at least.
Thank you. And I think we're going to end on that note here. So
thank you so much to our panelists for such an honest and forward-looking.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.